If you've ever looked at your course analytics and noticed something frustrating, it's probably this. People start strong. They move through the first few lessons, they're engaged, they're responsive, and then somewhere in the middle, progress slows. Completion rates dip, engagement thins out, and you're left wondering the content is solid. So what happened? This is one of the most confusing patterns in online courses because the beginning works, the ideas are clear, and the feedback is positive. So when learners disappear halfway through, it feels unpredictable, but it usually isn't. Most courses don't collapse because the content is bad. They collapse because the learning path quietly weakens. Let's talk about what that means. At the beginning of a course, structure is strong. There's orientation, clear expectations, smaller concepts, and manageable decisions for the learner. Early lessons tend to be tighter, more guided, and more defined. Learners feel the momentum, but as the course progresses, something often shifts. The decisions get bigger, and the tasks become less defined. The structure thins out. The learner is asked to do more with less visible guidance. And that's usually where the drop off begins. This doesn't happen intentionally. It happens because of how experts think. When you design a course, you naturally front load clarity. You explain the foundations first. You define terms and you outline the big picture. But once those foundations are established, it feels reasonable to move faster, to assume learner readiness, and to trust that learners can now run with it because they understand the basics. And from your perspective, that makes sense. But from the learner's perspective, that's where uncertainty increases. The middle of a course is where learners are expected to integrate new information, to apply what they've learned, to synthesize, and to make more independent decisions. And integration requires more than understanding. It requires a deeper level of knowledge. If those levels haven't been built deliberately, hesitation increases. Not because learners don't care, not because they're unmotivated, but because the cognitive demand of the course quietly rises. And when cognitive demand rises without structure, friction increases. Friction leads to delay, and delay leads to disengagement. From the outside, it just looks like loss of interest. But from the inside, it feels like, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. Another reason courses collapse in the middle is emotional risk. At the beginning, stakes are low. Learners are consuming, reflecting, and testing small ideas. Midway through the course, they're often asked to produce something larger, make decisions with consequences, or take visible action. This raises the emotional exposure. And exposure without clear, visible support feels risky. When something feels risky, progress slows. Again, not because the content is weak, but because the design assumes learner confidence that may not yet exist. There's also a structural illusion that happens here. When you review your course outline, it looks coherent. Module 1 flows into Module 2, Module 2 flows into Module 3, and so on. But flow on paper is not the same as flow in experience. On paper, the middle looks like continuation. In practice, it often feels like escalation. An escalation requires reinforcement. If the reinforcement isn't perceptible, learners feel like they've been moved from guided path to open terrain. The shift is subtle, but it's powerful. This is why early course feedback can be misleading. You might hear, "This is great, so clear. I love how you explain this." And that's true. The beginning often is clear, but clarity at the start doesn't guarantee coherence through the middle. The real test of a learning path is not how it begins, it's how it sustains momentum when decisions become more complex. Let's take a step back for a moment, look at the whole picture. The beginning of a course is structured around information. The middle of a course is structured around integration. Information is easier to design. Integration is harder because integration exposes gaps, and integration requires discomfort. It reveals where learners haven't yet internalized patterns, where judgment is still fragile, and where learner confidence is conditional. If the design doesn't account for that shift, the course feels heavier over time. And when something feels heavy, people pause. Most experts respond to mid course drop off by adding more content, more reminders, more accountability, more engagement. And while that's a good thought, if the issue is that the path weakened, adding more information won't repair it. Because the problem isn't volume, it's continuity. A strong learning path doesn't just move forward, it reinforces, it stabilizes, and it anticipates the moment where learners might hesitate. When that anticipation is missing, the middle becomes insurmountable, and mountains create drop offs. This is also why completion rates can be a misleading metric. Completion doesn't necessarily equal capability, but sustained engagement is often a signal of structural coherence. If learners consistently disengage in the same place, that's data. Not about their motivation, about their experience. The middle of your course is diagnostic. It tells you where the learning path might be thinning out. If you're listening to this and thinking, "Oof, I've definitely seen that mid-course drop off," that's not unusual. It's actually very common. Designing a beginning is relatively straightforward. Designing a sustainable middle is more nuanced because it requires thinking not just about what comes next, but what learners need in order to feel steady while moving forward. That's difficult from inside of your own expertise. When something feels obvious to you as an expert, it's hard to imagine feeling destabilizing with the same information to someone else. This is one of the reasons the learning path design matters so much. Not just sequencing content, but sustaining progression, maintaining clarity as complexity increases, and ensuring that integration feels supported rather than abrupt. If your course collapses in the middle, that doesn't mean it's poorly built. It often means the escalation wasn't intentionally designed. An escalation without scaffolding feels like free fall. If this helped you reframe how you're interpreting drop off, that's useful. It's not about creating more content. It's about examining how the learning path holds up under increased demand for the learner. That's the kind of work we focus on inside Confident Course Design. Looking closely at where the experience shifts and whether that shift is supported. Because strong courses don't just start well, they sustain momentum all the way through. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next video.